thank you for joining us for this month's training intensive. The title is From Victim to Hero, Seeing the Light at the End of a Dark Tunnel. I am Annette Oltmans, founder and CEO of the MEND Project. On the third Tuesday of each month, we host regularly a 1-hour free intensive to dive deeper into particular topics around the issue of emotional abuse. Today's training will be recorded and housed on our training and resource page at themendproject.com, where you will find all of our past training intensives on YouTube, as well as podcasts that I've participated in, blogs, and other resources that you can download for free. We hope you will share any recordings that you enjoy with friends and colleagues. It really, it's one of the key ways that you can help MEND reach more who are in need and also increase our impact. When you watch intensive recordings, please be sure to put questions or your thoughts, your comments in the comments and hit the subscribe button. One more thing before we jump into today's topic, please be sure to visit our website to take advantage of one of the training cohorts we are sponsoring. These are launching this week and next, but if you hurry, you'll still be able to join us. We have programs for survivors or anyone who is in a high conflict relationship wanting to learn more, as well as American Psychological Association certified courses for both clinicians and non-clinician responders for up to 9.5 hours of continuing education credits. Simply visit the training curriculum page on our website at themendproject.com to subscribe, register, and learn more. Pardon me. As we spend time together, even while I'm speaking, please feel free to put any comments or questions you have regarding this material into the chat box so we can address it during our open Q&A time at the end of our time together. If you want to ask a private question and remain anonymous, please simply reach out to Jill Rice, one of our team members, through the chat, and she will protect your privacy while asking the questions. All questions are asked anonymously. Please don't wait to ask your question. It's helpful to us if you put the questions in the chat so we can discern what questions we can get to and how quickly we can. For those who have registered for today's intensive, we will email you a link of the recording. So if you need to leave early, don't worry about it. You can ask your questions in advance, and then you'll be able to review the answer through the recording later. Okay, so let's dive in. MEND seeks to, our three catchy words that describes what we do is to educate, equip, and restore all those impacted by abuse. We often talk about the educate and equip portion of our mission and what it's like for victims who are in very challenging, confusing, and destructive relationships. Many don't recognize that what they are experiencing is abuse. And in the instance they are reaching out for help, it's likely they are stuck in what we call a chronic state of stressful confusion, or what are known as trauma states, unaware that the problems that they're experiencing qualifies as abuse. A key part in their healing journey is to unlock that state of confusion by counteracting it with clarity. Clarity enables victims to identify and name those confusing, manipulative behaviors that they're experiencing. And being able to identify and name destructive behavioral patterns is essential for victims to begin their healing journey. So said another way, clarity is the first necessary step to healing. So educating and equipping are now obvious by my explanation, but what do we mean when we say restore? The MEND projects help restore those who are impacted by abuse by making known important resources that are available and encouraging ongoing active participation in those resources in order to experience support on their healing journey. I will share some of those resources in a minute, but first I want to note that we have had multiple people come to our organization seeking help and resources, and then choose to remain connected to our organization. They check in with us along their journey and share their progress. The gift of hearing these healing stories affirms the good work that is being done and that there is hope for everyone, even when it feels hopeless, and that the MEND Project is contributing to the process of restoring individuals who have experienced harm in their relationships. And as we go through the resources today that move victims into being survivors and ultimately propels them into being heroes, our team will share some of those stories from victims that we have helped. I think stories are always really important, and they can be very inspiring. And so I'm looking forward to our team sharing those with you. Restoring is the ultimate objective of the MEND's mission and vision, helping victims gain clarity and validation and then finding their healing path. And this conversation brings all of us at the MEND Project so much joy when we see a victim travel through that journey and come out on the other side. There are a number of stages victims journey through that move them to survivor and then on to hero. And if you are a responder joining us today, I want to encourage you to take note of the resources that we will talk about, because these are important resources that you can then offer those in your care. So how do we delineate victim versus survivor and survivor versus hero? A victim is someone in an abusive relationship, and they may have not yet identified that they are being abused. So when a victim can identify that they are a victim, it's a huge step in acknowledging the reality of their situation. But in most cases, victims are highly stressed and confused as they search for answers to untangle their relationship. Many find our website, which provides them the clarity and the terminology they need. And as a victim obtains clarity over time, they begin to see their circumstances more accurately. They're no longer ruminating over all the different scenarios that have gaslighted them or that they need to try to organize in their mind. They're able to now make different choices and to begin to care for themselves. They come to learn that they are dealing with a partner who has an entirely different worldview than the victim, and this different worldview is destructive. Many start their healing journey in isolation, either because their abuser has controlled who they can communicate with, or because they are unsure of who will be trustworthy and safe, a safe person or a safe community of people for them to confide in. But many are also beaten down emotionally. They wrongly believe that the problems in the relationship are somehow their fault, or that they carry some responsibility for the abuse. Before I continue, I want to clearly state that abuse is a choice the abuser alone makes. It's not an accident, and it's never the victim's fault. But sadly, victims often believe the mischaracterizing words that the abuser has spoken over them. The victim thinks there must be something intrinsically wrong with me due to the negative messaging their partner has consistently projected onto them. They have been gaslighted, lied to, and have not experienced mutual respect or reciprocity. The victim thinks, I must not be lovable, and so forth. They view themselves as the potential problem. And victims are usually very empathic, so they have a lot of compassion for their abuser. And empaths are also usually very willing to self-examine, looking for ways that they might be contributing to problems. And this is very different than an abusive mindset that works hard to avoid taking responsibility for any problems. So victims often take on the lion's share of the problem in their personal beliefs. The way victims often view themselves as less than is critical to understand. So it's paramount for helpers and responders to gently help victims understand what abuse is, whether it's psychological or physical, and directing victims to our website is one way to help them identify the specific abusive behaviors they are experiencing. For example, in our terms and definitions, it helps to give proper language to victims so they can understand and describe their experiences. A victim then becomes a survivor when they become strong enough to make some changes. For some, it may be that they learn to emotionally detach from their partner and coexist in the same home while significantly limiting the scope of conversations. For example, they no longer share their vulnerabilities, or they no longer seek deep emotional connection because they understand that it's not attainable. For others, it may be adopting firm boundaries matched with tangible consequences when the abuser refuses to comply. And this takes a lot of strength that the victim is not necessarily comfortable initiating. But setting boundaries requires courage, which is an indicator of a victim transitioning into survivor. Similarly, some victims may choose to separate or divorce themselves from an abusive relationship and move forward in their lives on their own terms, reclaiming their personal power. A survivor becomes a hero when they are able to use their story to help others experiencing similar harm. So we mentioned to you that many actually survivors share their stories with us. And that's always, it's not a mandatory step, but it's always a really helpful step for a victim to be able to share their story, even anonymously, to put it in writing, to make it known, to own their reality. It's a form of validation. And heroes, they can be quietly walking alongside someone offering emotional support, or many former victim survivors transition into actively working as advocates, etc. The key to success on a path from victim to survivor to hero is becoming aware of and utilizing available resources to help them on their healing journey. Victims most often have developed post-traumatic stress disorder, or even worse, complex post-traumatic stress. To heal from this requires multiple modalities, such as therapy, reading books, reading articles, physical activity and exercise, art therapy, and so forth. Also, an abuse group or classes and so on are always really helpful. Choosing a qualified therapist who understands abuse can be vital to some who seek healing. And there are many quality, low cost or no cost options when seeking help from a domestic violence agency or shelter. A good therapist or counselor will listen over and over as you process out loud what you've been through. They will believe your story. They will validate you and demonstrate empathy. They will not confront the victim. They will not interrogate them or expect the victim to make the same choices that the therapist might make for themselves. The therapist will also gently uncover the victim's faulty beliefs about themselves, like I mentioned before, such as, I must not be lovable, or there must be something wrong with me. And the therapist will encourage and support them in new thinking that lifts the victim's low self-worth into a process of self-empowerment. Victims often lack self-love. They often overfunction in the relationship, working much harder than the abuser to find solutions. Some call this codependency, but there is a newer phrase coined by an author and therapist, Ross Rosenberg, who wrote The Human Magnet Syndrome. And I highly recommend that victims read this book. The new term is self-love deficit disorder, which I think better describes one of the largest obstacles for victims to work through and overcome before they can become survivors and heroes. It's a more appropriate term than codependency because self-love deficit disorder addresses the root of the problem. It often begins from early attachment trauma in childhood. If, for example, the victim was raised by a narcissistic parent or caretaker who minimizes the child's emotional viewpoints or does not support the child to gain emotional health, emotional awareness, and emotional well-being. Understanding self-love deficit disorder will help therapists and victims to begin the process of creating new and positive views of oneself and change their beliefs about how their world actually works. A more accurate and loving view of oneself will help lead the victim from victim to survivor and ultimately to hero. In the Human Magnet Syndrome book, Ross Rosenberg writes about how many victims are attracted to the same personalities they interacted with as children, causing them to choose a person with narcissistic traits. Maybe we will address this more comprehensively in a future intensive, because I'm really passionate about this and I think that would be helpful. But for now, moving on. Many times, and particularly victims of emotional abuse, will feel hopeless in their circumstances. A good counselor or therapist will continually reassure and instill hope through validation, a new or different perspective, lens, worldview, so forth. Domestic violence agencies and shelters offer low-cost counseling with well-trained therapists, and they consult with experts in abuse to provide the best care following best practices. Financial hardship is a key factor for victims and survivors of abuse. So being aware of low-cost resources available to them is very important. And you can also contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline or their website to get a list of local domestic violence services in your area. The hotline number is 1-800-799-SAFE. SAFE. Another resource that is low cost and can be very helpful is what is called Personal Empowerment Program. Many domestic violence agencies offer this certified class. Remember when I noted this earlier, it's an important point. It's highly possible that the individual seeking resources may not even identify as a victim. So a class for victims of abuse may not be what they pursue when in fact, courses are truly what they need. Personal Empowerment, or PEP, is a 10-week educational program specifically designed for victims and survivors of abuse. And PEP courses provide the victim in ending the cycle of abuse by bringing victims and survivors through worksheets and group discussions that get them in touch with how they really feel about themselves and what they need to do to change. I also want to mention Natalie Hoffman and the Flying Free podcast and groups that she offers to help victims overcome their faulty thinking and beliefs and take them through the process of healing. Her program is very focused on the healing process. It's very low cost, and it's a comprehensive program to lead victims through their journey. Please listen to the most recent 3-part series on her podcast, where a survivor shares her old beliefs in contrast to what her new beliefs have transitioned to. It's very insightful to hear directly from a victim turned survivor hero. Also, at the Men Project, we offer a 7-week training curriculum that unpacks abuse, the mindset of abusers, and the faulty beliefs victims carry about themselves. In our comprehensive curriculum, we dig into multiple related topics that go deeper and really help victims gain the clarity that they need to propel them on their healing journey. The course requires about 30 minutes of reading per week, along with a 1-hour live session with me. And these sessions are also recorded so you can view them at your convenience. We are beginning this cohort tomorrow, so please sign up today to enroll. You will find the link on the Men Project's website. At the Men Project, we often walk alongside victims in their journey. We hear heart-wrenching stories and we hear inspiring ones. So now I'd like members of our team to share a few insights they have gleaned from victim stories. Carly?
Hi, I'm gonna share today a small part of a victim's story. She and her partner had been seeing a therapist who wasn't able to see and understand the abusive dynamics that were at play in her relationship. And desperate for help, she did some of her own research online and came across the MEND website. With these resources and materials, she was able to gain clarity about her experience for the first time. She shared this website with her therapist, who had previously struggled to understand the abusive dynamics and covert emotional abuse that was happening. Particularly, our terms and definitions enabled her therapist to better grasp the complicated abusive behaviors the victim was able to then explain. It's super hard to explain manipulative behaviors, but with the proper terminology from an expert in the website, the victim was able to advocate for herself for the first time and gain clarity, which is the first step to healing.
Oh, thank you. Yes. We hear stories like that a lot where victims either downloaded we have PDFs of our terms and definitions and other tools, and you can download them for free. And they either take that into their therapist or they bring their computer and show them the website. And it's been really helpful. Now, if your therapist doesn't quickly catch on, we strongly recommend that you move on to somebody else. So now I'd like to introduce Jill Rice, another member of our team who has a story to share with you. It's about a survivor whose therapist offered new perspectives and how that made the victim feel.
Yeah, I'm going to use the name Jane just to keep anonymity here. Jane, her story was so beautiful, and what it looked like when the therapist actually helped her to move towards becoming a survivor. So as a victim, she had been so beaten down, which is really common. It's probably a consistent experience for victims. We can say at the Men Project that we come across is oftentimes they get to the point where they don't even trust themselves. And Jane had found herself in this position where even making the slightest decisions was really challenging. And so she really was leaning heavily on others to do that for her. And this highly skilled therapist that she was working with gave Jane the permission to make mistakes, to change her mind when she got new information, just to accept that if she made a decision and she changed her mind, that was okay. And it was okay to try new things or make decisions she hadn't made previously on her own. So this skilled therapist began to help Jane to see that most of her life and most of life for all of us really isn't lived in the black and white of, I just don't want to make a wrong decision, is oftentimes what a victim will feel because they start to not trust themselves based on their situation and being just beaten down continually. So rather than seeing things as I'm going to make a wrong decision or I need to make the right decision, what decision should I make? Jane started to learn that life was lived mostly in the gray, and her therapist helped her see this, that what that means is it was okay to just make the best decision she could with the information she had at the time. So the therapist would say to her that her instincts were good, she can trust herself, that she just affirmed her ability to connect with her gut, which oftentimes victims can stop learning to listening to that because there's so many tactics being used against them. So she strengthened and empowered her to begin to confidently make choices and make decisions. And after being in an abusive relationship where she was so beaten down and she didn't trust herself, now these decisions she started making over and over again on her own, and she became strengthened, and she then moved into becoming survivor. So the support of this therapist really strengthened her in her ability to trust herself, equipped her to listen to herself, to trust her voice, to use her voice, and to start making those good choices for herself. And she began thriving as a survivor over time. So now she is living wholly and supporting herself and her family when she never thought any of that was possible. So we want everyone here, just to communicate this to all of you, to know that with every decision, it's not the last chance you get to make a choice. It's not the last decision you get to make, and it's okay to change your mind. So when we're presented with new information or we need to course correct, we all do that at times. This is what Jane learned. And so she implemented it, and she didn't remain stuck. Many victims get stuck because they feel like they're going to be living in judgment or under condemnation if they make that wrong decision. But victims don't have to think of their circumstances as black and white, similar to what Jane learned. So this victim has moved into being a survivor, and just with the help of a really highly skilled and well-trained therapist who was compassionately walking alongside her and helping her change her perspectives.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. I think, it's so common that victims doubt their perspective after being gaslit and lied to and confused so much. So they wonder, am I crazy? Like, why doesn't anything make sense? So it's really common for victims to doubt themselves. And it's really helpful to then step into that realm where you're starting to make decisions knowing that you can change your mind and it's not the last chance. So thank you, Jill. Now I'd like to introduce Stephanie Byerly, our executive director. Stephanie, please share about Stuart's story of healing and survival and how he had to set healthy boundaries with his family.
Absolutely. I almost forgot to take the mute off, so that's not super helpful. Yeah, I'm excited to share Stuart's story with you. Please know that you can read his story on our Stories of Healing or in our blogs on our website. You can just click on blogs, and then in the search key, you can press Stuart, like write Stuart in, and his story will come up. And you can search any kind of other type of blog you might want to learn about. We do educational blogs, but every month we do at least one story from a survivor. That's my plug. The name of his story is Robbed of a Childhood, an adult child overcoming abuse from a narcissistic mother. Now, I've known Stuart since he was young, and as a friend on the outside, I never had any idea that he was a victim of covert emotional abuse by his narcissistic mother. I introduced him to the Men Project a few years ago now, and over time, he started sharing with me the details of his story. And truly, I was blown away. I really had no idea of the deep pain that he went through as a child and in his adult years. I kind of felt guilty that I didn't know and that he struggled so significantly. Now for Stuart, the pain traveled with him through a few abusive adult relationships. And it's kind of exactly what Annette was saying earlier, that until you unpack the narcissism, oftentimes you pick partners who are narcissistic, which is exactly what his journey involved. He went on, into alcohol and drug addiction before he ever realized that he was a victim of narcissistic covert abuse. I mean, it's exactly what Annette was saying earlier. It wasn't until after post-rehabilitation and sobriety and some months in deep therapy with a good counselor that it became clear to him that he was a victim. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes and I keep losing my place. That he was a victim of covert abuse by his mother. The realization for him, it really opened up a whole world of understanding and healing. Just the idea that he was not crazy, that he was not broken and not a horrible person. So he went from victim to survivor, and he dug in really deeply to get the healing that he needed and to soar in confidence. What was super confusing for Stuart was that he was highly successful as a business person, but wasn't successful in relationships and was hurting so significantly internally. It never made sense. There were just these two sides of his world that didn't make sense to him. But through self-help, therapy, and deeper understanding, he started taking the steps that he really needed to take in order to maintain his personal sense of peace and strength. For him, this meant setting really strict boundaries with his mother. I mean, there were years where he couldn't see or talk to her at all because he was unable and unwilling to deal with the extreme control and the power that she tried to exert over him. And over time, he was able to do some family gatherings just so long as they met in a neutral location where she had no control. So it's been an on again, on off again scenario for them. But it's all being decided according to what has been best and healthiest for Stuart, which is really important. Now, Stuart's family and extended family gave him and continues to give him a very difficult time for not seeing his mom because now she's in her older years. And his mom has written letters to the entire family blaming Stuart's psychiatrist, saying that the psychiatrist was putting all kinds of crazy ideas into Stuart's mind. And she shared her opinion that you know, she just wanted her son back, and she's the victim basically. And she thought he was addicted to the prescription medication that he was on and all the things. So he got the difficulty of setting boundaries in a relationship with his parents, but then the added on factor of all the shame and guilt that the whole family started putting upon him because of how she reached out to him. But he realized over time that he could not be personally responsible for other people's unwillingness to see and receive the truth about how abusive his mother was, and really continues to be with anyone in her close circles. And he's just decided not to let the guilt and shame that others are trying to put upon him to prevent him from living freely and healthily and powerfully. So all of this is really just to say and give an example that one of the hardest things that survivors of abuse can do is to set strict boundaries with family, let alone decide if they have to completely cut off relationship with them. But there are times really when that's exactly what someone needs to do in order to maintain their peace. And I, for one, just being his dear friend, I'm so grateful that he made this choice because it has changed his life wholly and completely. So thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. You know, it just brings to mind that victims who have a low view of themselves, which most do, are so susceptible to the comments that other people make in their social circle or in their family circle, the chatter, the noise, the criticisms, the lack of understanding, the judgment. And when a victim can get to a place where they realize, you know, they're adults, they're entitled to their thoughts, but it's not going to affect my thoughts and my boundaries that I need to maintain peace and safety in my life. When they get to that point that they're able to devalue what they had prior really valued and allowed to affect them, then they're getting into that survival place of mind. Okay, so now
I think it's cool just thinking about this, just to take a note about what really his family was doing is a form of double abuse. They were colluding with the abuser to shut him down and to compel him into actions that he wasn't able to make in a healthy fashion. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Lauren. Lauren, you have a story to share with us.
So here's the thing, for those moving from victim to survivor, survivor to hero, active engagement with others is such a necessary part of the healing journey for any victim. But here's the reality, building relationships is an ongoing working process for any victim of abuse. However, several victims have shared with us how they really needed to stretch themselves in order to engage with others in their lives. One of the most common things we hear from victims and survivors is it seems easier just to be alone in order to heal. And this is especially true with victims who face being re-traumatized or when they're double abused early on in their journey. One victim, which I will share their story anonymously, shared her story and expressed how she intentionally isolated herself from everyone in her life. This included family and friends because she was intensely fearful of being re-traumatized. This victim, like so many others, had to really stretch herself to change her pattern of isolation. Some of the things she found helpful included breath work and calming meditation apps that helped her release the trauma from her body. She also used essential oils to enhance certain feelings, both positive and negative, that she had previously detached from. These may seem like small things initially, but taking these initial baby steps of self-care are often what it takes for one to feel more comfortable to take the larger steps necessary in the healing process. Her interest in meditation, breathing, and oils ultimately led her to begin taking a yoga class where she met new people who were gentler and kinder. The social aspect of these classes and the healthy connections she began to create through them really helped her overcome that isolation. This victim was ultimately able to set future goals for herself, things she knew she would love to be doing at some time in the near future. She was able to tangibly identify these goals and then slowly begin to implement them through the process of engaging with others. And that process of engaging with others was crucial to her healing journey.
Thank you, Lauren. You know, victims cannot heal in isolation. It just stunts the process. Yet it often feels like the most safe place a victim can go. So it really is a stretching process, and the healing journey requires stretching throughout the entire process. There's so many steps that a victim needs to, it's to push up against their trauma and be willing to see what will happen when they reach out and do something new. So thank you for that. It's a really critical process. So now that we have considered a few of the important steps that victims can take for themselves to strengthen and solidify them on their healing journey, staying connected to these resources consistently over time is key. What unfolds on the journey is like the birth of a butterfly, from wobbly caterpillar to cocoon and eventually to flight, from victim to survivor to hero. Many survivors of abuse become heroes. Once they come to a place of wholeness and freedom in their healing, they often become advocates and devote a portion or all of their time helping others who find themselves in the same challenging relational dynamics by being their friend, a volunteer, or professional advocate. We identify these beautiful souls as heroes, and they are all among us, some quietly and some sitting in the seats, teaching the PEP classes or providing low-cost advocacy. In my own journey, I've been amazed to see how many survivors are now volunteering or working in the field of domestic violence. In fact, many governmental agencies addressing the broader topic of domestic violence insist on having survivors be part of their team. Survivors offer insight and knowledge that someone who has never experienced abuse will have a harder time understanding. Two people come to mind that I just want to mention, just to give you hope and inspiration. Heroes like Veronica Stevens at Laura's House. Laura's House is a local domestic violence shelter in my area. She came from a family of generational child abuse, and then she married an abuser who beat her down emotionally for many years. She became emotionally and physically ill, as many victims do, but she did the hard work. She now educates the community on topics pertaining to domestic violence and is a passionate advocate who truly understands. So this was a huge transition in her life. It took a while, but she is serving the community in remarkable ways at this point. And then there's Kate Anthony, who came out of many years of an abusive marriage. She coaches victims and began a podcast called The Divorce Survival Guide that has many followers, where she focuses on helping victims navigate the legal process of divorce in custody with their abuser. Victims who finally are able to share their story, as many have on our website, or who are helping others coming out of their own stories and are working as advocates in DV agencies, et cetera, or even quietly among us, are true heroes. That is what it takes to get to that point. It means you've done the work and you're now able to help others without being re-traumatized. They have done the necessary work and moved on to helping others. So now, in conclusion, I just would like you to please join our team for our upcoming training cohorts. I know that you will really enjoy them and benefit from them. It's offered virtually and will help equip you to identify covert emotional abuse and gain deeper understanding about the ways covert emotional abuse and psychological abuse impacts relationships, physical health, and well-being. And remember, if you're watching the recording, information about registration and training dates can be found in the description or comments section on our website. So finally, please subscribe on our website to receive our training updates, and to our YouTube channel, invite a friend and spread the word. And now, as we close, we'd like to take time for any questions you may have. Please feel free to drop them in the chat.
So neat. This is so fun to be part of all of this with you, Annette, and just this work we get to do together and all these stories. And I hope everyone was encouraged today. So we do have a couple of really nice questions here that I want to ask. Actually, this first one is really, really important. I'm really glad this person asked it. So Annette, and you'll understand why. I'm going to go ahead and ask it now. I'd like to know Annette's opinion and advice for a survivor who does not feel much like a survivor because her abuser left her. Despite her numerous attempts to remain married, even after having discovered the situation was abusive. The term survivor denotes more of an active position, a surviving by default, as it were, does not feel like a complete survival. despite the availing of numerous domestic abuse resources that you had mentioned early on in the talk.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. It's a hard journey. And if I understand you correctly, he left the situation. So you're not alone in that. Abusers almost uniformly do not want to accept responsibility. They do not want to be held accountable. They like functioning the way they're functioning. It's worked for them. They have been allowed to control a lot of the relationships in their lives, but particularly intimate interpersonal relationships. So as hard as it is, I would love for you to take a look at your own feelings of abandonment and really dig into that and where it comes from, and recognize that you might have this intense longing for that reunification, but oftentimes it comes out of that self-love deficit disorder and fears of abandonment and other viewpoints that you have about yourself that are not yet fully healthy. And so I just really encourage you to seek the help of a counselor. Get that book that I mentioned, The Human Magnet Syndrome, and see if that resonates with you. But again, I'm really sorry. I know I went through something similar, and it's really hard because you're just trying to do what's best for the relationship, and you're empathic and you're compassionate, and you can't understand why the other person doesn't want to take that journey too.
I also think, Annette, that was so good. And one of the things I responded very briefly to this person in the chat, just saying, and I'm curious if you'll agree with this. I'm thinking you will, but anybody who's on the opposite side. So now once you're out of that situation and you're on the other side of it, whether you're 1 day out of it or 1 year out of it or 1 decade out of it, you are a survivor. You are on the other side of that, no matter if it was a forced separation because services came in, if it was this person's choice or this person's choice, you're still a survivor at that point.
You know, I heard this in a talk once, that even if you're just 1 step ahead of the person next to you on their journey, you can offer help to them. And so you are a survivor because you've learned a lot. You might not have learned everything. You might not be exactly where you want to be, but you have traveled a distance and you've learned a lot. And so I would just affirm, like, give yourself permission to affirm the progress that you've made.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have a couple more that just popped in. So let's get to them. This one is, what's the best thing you can do when you feel like you can barely make it out of bed? The thought of yoga or meditation or any of those things can feel impossible. Taking any step alone, let alone the next step, is impossible to even fathom. So what then?
I know. Oh gosh, I remember being there. What I did was I reached out to a couple girlfriends who would hold me accountable to go on a long walk once a week. And just getting my tennis shoes on and making the commitment was so hard. But it really helped to have an accountability partner to help say, what have you done this week to stretch yourself? Really, maybe they can look into some things for you where you might have an interest, a book club, or whatever your personal interests are, and have them help you find resources if that seems too overwhelming. But it's just so important to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and take a step, because when you get out and you do these things, you feel positive endorphins affecting you and lifting you out of this dark hole. And it takes you have to repeatedly stretch yourself. And you're your own best advocate. No one's going to do it for you. You need to rely on yourself for this, to get you to the next phase of healing.
So
good luck on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes once you take that the first step is sometimes the hardest.
Yes, that's true.
Getting there is sometimes the hardest, but once you're there, you'll feel.
But
so-
if you have complex post-traumatic stress, it's going to feel hard a lot of the times. So I just encourage you to just push through it the best that you can, and take baby steps if you need to. Maybe you're not ready to go on a long walk with a friend, but you can go on a short walk with a friend, for example. Just think of things that you might feel comfortable doing, even though it's a stretch, and just begin to do that. It really will work.
Yeah. This next one we can celebrate. We have a victim and a hero among us, and I'm going to read what she wrote. It says, I am a victim and a hero at this time. I am at the very beginning stages of a very ugly divorce and really don't know where I will end up living and surviving. I'm on a very limited income. I am a hero because I am doing so much to thrive and even helping others on my journey. I pray I can do more after I'm out of the relationship. I have been told that death is easier than divorce, and I'm feeling that. Thank you for this valuable information and the many women working to help people like me.
You're so welcome. Oh boy, it's going through a divorce with a former or with an abuser is really challenging. And so you're just in a really hard season right now, but it's not going to last forever. You may have to co-parent forever. I don't know if you have children together, but it does get better. And I would tap into podcasts and resources like the one we mentioned about Divorce Survival Guide. Things like that, you can get some really good pointers to help you through this process. And I would tap into all the resources that you can get your hands on.
Really good. Okay. I think that's it for the questions. Let me just double check one sec here, make sure because it was popping a little bit. Okay, we covered all of the questions. If we missed any, I always like to make this note. If for some reason I missed someone's question, I apologize. Please email us at info@themendproject.com and our team will address it through email.
All right. Well, then, thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. And I hope you'll sign up for our training cohort, and that we'll see you next month for our next training intensive. Take good care. Bye.